Hello, I'm Marjorie Suchocki, and I'm Dean at Wesley Theological Seminary, also a process theologian. And I'd like to talk with you today about power, or I'd like you to think with me today about power. What is power, and how do we understand the power of God? It's an old question. It's answered biblically through images, and I'd like to spin out a few of my own. I used to live on the mountains of California, and our house was the last house in the mountain. One of the first real senses of power, raw power, I ever experienced was the day we were told that the fires were coming. I'll never forget the day. The wind had whipped the flames so that they were leaping over the mountains faster than they could be controlled. Our house was on the edge, and it was in danger of being swallowed up in the flames, and so we were all packed and ready to evacuate. But we stayed there as long as we could to watch those flames coming closer, to watch them dance over the mountains, to see the sky turn so dark that the sun wasn't there, even at noon. It had turned to black. To see the sparks leap into the air and come toward us was to experience the rawness of power that I'd never experienced before. And I knew it was a power that could devour. And it left nothing but charred blackness behind it so quickly it was hardly believable. That's power. Is that the power of God? Another time I went to Niagara Falls. I experienced power there too. Have you ever done it? It was the opportunity to go and stand behind the falls. And so I did. I went down through a cave, and the cave opened up to just behind the water. So I could stand there and see the sheets of water coming down the whole of Niagara Falls, as if it was this enormous power thundering coming down. And I knew that the power of that water coming drop by drop was creative enough to carve out the whole St. Lawrence Seaway, to carve out a path to the sea. Is that like the power of God? There was another experience of power. I was invited to go to a place where they made jet aircraft engines, and I stood in a room, a wind tunnel, and saw the mighty jet engine, and not only heard it, but felt the sound. That engine was so powerful in that wind tunnel that it was as if the sound that came forth from it wasn't just heard, it was felt in every fiber of my being, and I felt my whole self vibrating to the power of that engine. A creative power, this time not the same kind of power as the water, but a more focused, pulled together, reasoned power that could do mighty things with the power of air and earth and energy. Is that the power of God? There was another time I experienced power in my life. And this time it was the power. Well, let me first tell you what the situation was, and then you'll understand something of what I mean by power, because to me God was not in the fire, and God was not in the waterfall, and God was not in the mighty engine, but God was at a different space. There was a time in my life when I experienced despair. And the image for that, to me, has always been, ever since, the image of a winter fog, cold, over a barren landscape. And the power of despair is one which would negate the horizon. There is no horizon in despair, but itself multiplied to infinity. It swallows up the past and it swallows up the future and pretends it's the only present there will ever be. And I felt the power of despair. The power of despair was enough to swallow up all hope. And in the midst of that experience, sitting at a dining room window, looking out at a winter landscape that was nothing but an echo of the winter landscape of my soul, I felt the power of moving through despair to hope. The knowledge that the despair was an illusion, a distortion of the way the world really is, that beneath it is not the barrenness of winter, but the hope of a spring to come, and therefore the power not to be swallowed and engulfed by that fog, but to endure beyond it, to become a part of a springtime. In the silence of that moment of living through was a power of redemption. And to me, the power of redemption is what the power of God is all about. It wouldn't have been visible to someone watching me. all you would have seen was a woman sitting by a window, not visible like the power of a fire or a waterfall or an engine, but more powerful than any one of them in that it was the power of hope to a human life. God is a power of redemption, speaking to my condition wherever I am, to bring me from where I am to where I can be, transformatively, creatively. That's the power that speaks and matters to me and is to me the revealing power of God for redemption. How would one express that? I can tell it to you in images. What would it mean to say it theologically? Or rather, to put it this way, how can these things be? How is it that the God of redemption is the God of the universe? What is God like that God can speak to a woman alone by a window, a whispered word of redemption? It seems to me that the power of God, which is able to give that word, is a power that relates to us so deeply that God knows everything I am. God knows all that I deal with. God is a power so intensely in relation with me, with you, with everything which exists, that God is the one, the only one, who knows us thoroughly. That the power of God for redemption is rooted in God's openness to the world, such that God feels the world as it is, understands me thoroughly within the divine life, and out of that divine understanding can speak back to me a word which meets me and brings me to where I can be. The God of redemption is a God of infinite relationality, a God who dares to be present to a world, even in its moments of despair. A God who dares to be present to the world, even those moments when it feels itself devoured by a fire, or overwhelmed by a waterfall, or dwarfed by the power of an engine. That God is the one who is with us wherever we are, God who is open to us. And in that openness of God to the world is the key to God's heart of redemption. God takes us where we are, into the divine nature, blends who we are with all of that which God is, and God is the mighty power of redemption. Connectedness, pulling us all together within who God is, that out of God's redemptive weaving of the world into God's nature comes back to us two things. One, a fitted word, a spoken word, a word that matches where we are, transformatively. Historical redemption is possible through this relational power of God. But the other side of that is that everlasting redemption is also possible through this redemptive power of God. There is that which God does with us within the divine nature which is everlasting. And out of God's everlasting work with us comes an everlasting redemption with temporal implications. We experience now those temporal implications, but the temporal is a witness to that which is going on everlastingly within the heart of God. God is relational. God relates to us. Out of that relationality, we know God's persuasive power pulling us to that which we can be, and God's everlasting power of redeeming the world within the divine nature. There are so many images of power, and I suppose one could take all of them and relate them in some way to God. But that which will always speak to me most deeply about the power of God is that which is God in the ordinary, God in the dailiness of where I am, knowing that the faithfulness of God's power is such that it is always redemptive. I've talked of God's power as a redemptive word that comes to us where we are to bring us to where we can be. And I've used an image there of a winter fog being dispelled by the power of a springtime, which is power of hope. And I've used other images of power too. But perhaps the deepest image, the one which speaks to us universally, is an image which comes to us through a cross and an Easter morning of resurrection. God is the power who can take any situation and bring it transformatively to redemption. God is creative transformation. A cross and a resurrection everlastingly reveals the powerful heart of the God we serve through Jesus Christ.